Hey, welcome everybody. And uh, I'm really happy to be at this conference. And today we're going to talk about the ins and outs of E2E tests, what every tester should know. And let me introduce myself quickly. I'm Don Wibier. I am technical evangelist with DevExpress. And today I will be broadcasting from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And as I said again, I'm really totally happy to be here. Let's get started here. So, what is end-to-end testing? Well, it's going to be a short introduction because we're going to roll with a lot of examples and tips and tricks here. And in contradiction with other testing procedures like unit and integration tests, an E2E test is performing a test on an entire process as if a user was doing it. Examples are registering a new user, putting some items in your shopping cart, but it is really all about the perspective of the end user. So it's a visual test. And why should we do that? Well, the cool thing is that the test is performed over all resources to complete a certain process in the application, like I was mentioning, registering a new user, putting some items in a shopping basket, or maybe even completing the checkout procedure on your shop as well. And it involves all the resources that are necessary to complete that procedure. So one of the things that you should know is because of that, the E2E testing is slow, but it is reliable if you have the proper tools. And if we would set this out to this particular graph, what you'll learn is that a unit test is fast because it only tests a couple of lines of code or maybe a bit more, but it is a fast check. And for that reason, it's also cheap. And if you take a look at the integration test right in the middle, that'll be a bit more expensive because it takes a bit more time. And yeah, at the top is the E2E test. And that is, yeah, if you compare it with the unit test, slow, and therefore it is quite expensive to do. So that is something to remember. But as I said, it is a highly reliable test. So there are also a couple of pros and cons of an E2E test that I'd like to discuss with you as well. So first, a couple of pros of an E2E test is that, as I mentioned, it tests an entire process from back to front, and as a result is tested, all the individual components and subsystems are being checked out. If one of them fails, yeah, the end result will fail as well. And it exposes user critical bugs because it emulates a certain user scenario. Not like a small portion of code, but it does an entire scenario. There are also some cons, and well, generally they take more time to execute, and therefore they are expensive, as I mentioned, and require an infrastructure of their own. So that means that you probably need like some testing machine or server or something in the cloud to test, and we'll talk about that a bit later as well. And yeah, it requires in most cases a lot of dependencies. If you are working in a cloud, it has a dependency with the cloud, etc., and that could cause some issues of their own. If you're not using a cloud, you need to keep up with all the browsers that you want to test, all the operating systems that you want to test, and yeah, that takes time to maintain those as well. So how can we do end-to-end testing? Well, in most cases with a tool which is mostly built around Selenium slash WebDriver. That's one of the most common tools here, and yeah, that web browsers also have features available for like the WebDriver to communicate with the testing systems. And so the WebDriver is an integration layer that exposes browser automation APIs to the test framework. But there is a but, because it can be tricky to set up. You have to set up a whole bunch of things in different browsers. You have to make sure that certain things in the operating system are allowed, etc., etc. So it's a bit of a hassle to set that up. Then there are also a couple of do's and don'ts of an E2E test framework, and some things are tempting to do with such a tool. And yeah, one of the things that is absolutely something that you should do is try to create real world scenarios for your tests. So don't do anything like where the chances are really slim that that's going to happen, but do something that is most accurate for your application. And yeah, if there are some edge cases, some really rare scenarios, you can set up some specific tests for that. But it is just to save some time on the E2E tests. And also, if you would compare the amount of E2E tests with like the number of unit tests in one of your applications, then you'll see that there are not that the amount of E2E tests are way less as the amount of unit tests. And that is obviously because it concerns an entire process and they are slower to execute. So one of the things that is quite tempting to do is use an E2E framework to perform non-functional testing like performance or load testing. And as I mentioned, it is tempting to do so because you can set up like a whole bunch of browser instances and there you go. But that is not the goal for a E2E test framework. And another thing which might sound a bit weird is don't test exceptions. And those exceptions are probably already caught by unit tests or integration tests. But just see that the entire process completes. That's the goal of an E2E test. So let's do a quick talk about common problems with E2E testing, because one of the most annoying things with E2E testing is tests that take a bit of time, and you have to put in some waiting strategies, and some tests might be a bit unstable. And so, for instance, if you are having a website which connects to a travel GDS to find airfares or whatsoever, such a GDS is quite a complex system, and with one search it will take 10 seconds, and maybe another search will take like 50 seconds. And your test tool should be able to wait for that and not like raise an exception unless the web page times out, but that's another issue. So that is something that can cause issues with testing frameworks. And then there is test interference, and that's another thing. So if you're running a test on a certain browser, maybe you run like a second test right behind it, but there might be some data like local storage or cache data or that might impact a second test. So that's also something that you want to take care of, that shouldn't happen. Every test should start with a clean setup, and there we go. And then there is something which is caused quite frequently as well, which is network and browser errors. You don't want your test fail because a network or browser error occurs, right? I mean, it's about your software, not the browser. So let's talk about something really cool, and that is how to perform an E2E test within 3 minutes. And I'm talking about like a bare metal system, nothing installed yet, except for the operating system and a number of browsers. We can set up an E2E test within 3 minutes. And how does that work? Well, I'll show you that. That is by installing and using TestCafe. And TestCafe is our open source E2E testing tool, which is freely available for you. And you can actually install that within 3 minutes, depending on your internet download speed, right? So if you don't have it installed yet, I did it obviously, so I won't do the first step. Just do an npm install testcafe min-g, and you'll have your testing framework set up. And how does TestCafe work? Well, TestCafe is built upon Node.js, and that means that we have set up a really cool API, which is JavaScript based, where you can define your tests. And this is a really simple test here, and I will actually show you how that works. And so what you see is we're setting up a fixture. That fixture refers to a specific page that we want to test. And next, what we'll do is we'll enter some information, we'll hit the submit button, and from that we can put in a assertion or do something else. And it is really that simple. And for that, I have set up a number of scripts, which I'll open up right now. And the first one is actually the one that I was showing on the slide deck as well. Yeah, so this is this is quite a simple test. And what I'll do, I'll open up this page in my browser as well, so you'll see what to expect. And this is something that allows you to see if TestCafe is properly installed, basically. So what this page holds is a number of controls. I can enter my name here, and I can tick a number of boxes, and I can select one of the options here. I can do something here. The most important thing is that when I hit submit, you'll see a thank you, which holds the name that I entered. And that is actually what we want to test. So something is being entered in that box, and it should match with this thank you page. And what you'll see if I switch over to Visual Studio Code in this case, I have defined a fixture here which refers to this page. So this page is being loaded in TestCafe. And I will use very modern JavaScript features like the async await structure, and I'll talk a bit about why that is later in the presentation. I'm going to type in some text in this particular element, and what you see is that these selector methods are part of the TestCafe API, and what you see is it's very easy to read, it's very to maintain because it's all JavaScript. Now we've got a couple of things here because we're going to put some ticks on the boxes as well. But the most important thing is that once we hit the submit button, we're going to find the selector that holds that thank you message. And we're going to put in an assert to see if this is what we were expecting. And in this case, John Doe was also being entered here, right? So if I would run this test, and for this I have set up a command line because this typically works from the command line. And this, by the way, runs on Windows, Linux, Mac OS, pretty much everything that runs test npm and Node. So if I would now like to test this on my Chrome browser, which is installed on this machine, I can say this command, TestCafe Chrome is the browser. I could do all as well, and that will open all browsers configured on this machine. And it will now start executing the test. And what we'll see, for some reason, I need to drag that window, that Chrome window in. What you'll see, it is playing it back, and what we'll see is that the test has passed. Yeah, so this is how you would set up a test in TestCafe, way within 3 minutes. So as I mentioned already, what is TestCafe? Well, it is a free and open source testing tool. And what is interesting to mention is that we started this as an internal project to test our own UI controls. For all of you not familiar with DevExpress, our main business is to develop the nicest and best UI controls for your application, whether it is for web or desktop. And specifically for our web controls, we needed something to test. And this is how TestCafe started. And that's also one of the things that we think makes TestCafe great, because we use it to make our own products better. And yeah, these days we have an actively growing community with about 1 million downloads per month. That's quite big. And because it's running on Node, it supports a whole variety of operating systems, and we also support a number of browsers. And the cool thing with TestCafe is that we don't require any plugins. And we have our own mechanism on running the scripts in the browser. You don't need to install anything else as npm testcafe -g. It's as simple as that. So how do we do some more advanced things with TestCafe? Because I just showed you a really simple test, but yeah, obviously you can do a whole bunch of really cool things with TestCafe. And yeah, how this works is I will show you a number of scripts quite quickly. And to do that, I have organized these scripts already in my folder. And at the end of the slide deck, I'll have my GitHub repo of these scripts, so you can just download them, play around with them. And one of the first things I will talk about is testing whether somebody can log in. And for that, I've put together a really small and simple application, which I'll show. And that application is, where did I leave that little application? Probably in one of my browsers here. Yeah, in this case, this is in Edge. It's a small, silly blogging thing. And the idea behind this is, if you want to reply, you need to log on. If you want to create a post, you need to register as a user and you'll have a certain access right. Then if somebody replies, it needs to be authorized by the administrator. And the application itself is quite simple, but it is more to show you how you can work with different users and user roles. So let's first see how we can check whether we are logged on. How can we test that? And that is really simple. If I log in here and I have to take it. I have to cheat in my script because I set up a couple of users here. So this is the first one. And I'm going to paste it in. It has a very complicated password here. And once I hit login, I can check whether this element contains the username. You see? So I can run this application, or I can run this script by going back to my command line and hit the second script here, which is the logon test. And what we'll see in this scenario is that I have to wait for the browser to show up on my wrong screen. There it is. What we'll see is that it will log in and it has already checked whether that element contained the specific username, and that was the case, so the test has passed. And so one of the things that you can do. What's interesting here is that we try to make our API as simple as possible. It's fluent for starters, so you can just type along, and it looks quite natural. So it's a familiar language with a familiar syntax, basically. We can take that a step further because we can also simulate a user that posts something. And so by this, we'll log in again. Next, we're gonna enter some some title and some, here is the title, and we're going to put in a body as well. And we're going to hit the post button, and next we're going to check whether that something else shows up in the results. And this is one of the last tests that I will actually run, because I'd like to talk a bit more about some more complicated things, and also how you can optimize your test scripts. Okay, so if I run this one, what we'll see is in a minute that the browser will pop up again. And there it is. We'll be logging in. And here is something that did not go too well. Let me check that as well. Yeah, I picked the wrong name, obviously. And I'll drag the browser back so you can see what's going on here. I'm logging in and I'm actually entering a post, and that's all set. You see? So that is something that you can do with the TestCafe. So let me get back to the slide deck before I'm out of sync there. So to recap what I've just done, I've just used a JavaScript file to compose that test. And I've done so by creating a fixture. Next, I created a test. You can actually have several tests in one fixture. And yeah, typically you would select one or more elements. And what you see is that it looks quite familiar with the CSS selector mechanism as well. We try to make it as natural as possible, so you don't need to spend a lot of time learning this specific API. And next, you'll perform an action or you'll assert something. Yeah? So I can also give you a number of selector tips here. So don't select too specific. For instance, a selector body find div and then the fifth element, etc., must be revised every time something on the page changes during development. Yeah, but also don't select too generic, because otherwise you can find several elements simultaneously. And yeah, try to keep those selectors human readable for easier maintenance. So something like the selector on the top container makes more sense as the other one that's on top of this. And also use custom HTML attributes to identify elements for testing. So like the data test ID, for instance, or yeah, those custom data elements can be used. So even if the entire structure changes, the page remains the same. So yeah, about several test management tips. Functional tests should not be dependent on implementation details. And yeah, so it's best to keep them somewhere near your production code, but not inside the same folder. So better create a folder with a number of tests in there. And also you can do any reused data to store in a specified directory. Another thing is that, as I mentioned, you can put several tests in one fixture, but make sure that those tests relate to that specific fixture, to keep things organized. And one of the things is that we would advise you to only define one fixture per every test file. So one fixture with one or more tests inside. And here are a couple of more things that you should be aware of. One of the things that I'd like to show you with the test scripts that I have prepared is by using a page model or page object pattern. I'll quickly head over there because, yeah, we're already reaching the end of this session. So how does that page model and page object pattern works with TestCafe? Well, what you see here is that we do selections on specific IDs. And yeah, if one of these IDs changes, you have to go over all the scripts and replace it. What you can also do here is you can, for instance, go to this particular script. And what I'll do is I have created a class, a JavaScript class. I've put in a couple of properties here, which hold those IDs, the selectors to those IDs. And with this, I could refine that script that you've seen earlier, and I could use that page model to specify the selectors that I want to do something with. And this makes it way cleaner, and you can actually reuse those page models quite a bit. And if something changes on the page, you can change that only in that page model thing. One of the last things that I'd like to show is how you can use specific roles in the application, because we've got a very nice setup for that as well. As I mentioned, my little tiny test application has basically two roles. One is the admin and the other one is a user. And the admin can authorize replies and it can create new posts, while the user can only add a reply. We can test that as well, and let me see if I have the correct script here. Yes, I have. And for this as well, I have set up, so what I do here is I will first log in as an administrator. I'll do that post that I just did. Then I will go to the login page again and I will log in as a normal user, which I already set up. And I'm going to put in a comment here. You see? Then I will re-log on as an admin user and authorize that reply. And this is something which is very powerful, because with this you can actually test roles inside your application. And if I would run this script, you will actually see that the post is being created, the user logs out, another user logs in, makes a reply, and it's actually being authorized. And we can also put this code a bit more efficient together by using the roles feature. And so you just saw me do something with the admin, and you saw me do something with this other user. But what I can do here is if I import the role from the TestCafe API, I can define a specific user like this. And I can define another user again like this. And if I would now run that script, I can, let me see which one that was. That was this one. I can now run a test and execute the TUseRoleAdmin user. Put that post up. The next test is going to be use the regular user, do something in there, and put a reply on it. And last, I can do the code to authorize it. So with this, I can switch forward and back to different roles pretty quickly, and it doesn't interfere or it doesn't do anything to ruin your test, basically. These are sandboxed environments, and they will not interfere with each other. And so a very powerful feature. And then, yeah, we're almost on at the end of this this small session. There's obviously one other thing that I would like to show, and that is remote testing. And yeah, these days a lot of people use a browser farm to test, like Sauce Labs. And also, we have support. TestCafe has support to execute those tests remotely. And in this case, I'm going to show you a test that runs on the Sauce Labs infrastructure. How cool is that? So for that, I have set up an account here at Sauce Labs. Let me see. Yeah, I obviously need to log in again. And in this case, I have a free trial and it works with that as well. And what I've next done is I have set up a test which uses the new source control feature. Let me see, that was right. Not this one, but I had another one set up. You will always see that I can't find it right now. Okay, I probably closed that one. Let me change over to this folder, and I have a quickly checking out how I called that folder. Yeah, CD Test Cafe. And what's going to happen now is, let me first get back to the admin interface here. So I've already done a couple of tests to see that that all works. And what I've done is I've actually run a test which is on the test side from Sauce Labs, the shop, and I'm going to add a couple of products to my shop. So if I would now execute the, let me have a quick check what the command was again. I can now execute npx test cafe. Oh no, run, and it is now going to check a couple of things here. And next, it will be executing on the new SaaS cloud infrastructure, and it will actually run a test. And what you'll see here is that it will execute a test on a number of environments, and you can see that real time as well. So if I remove this one, you already see that a number of things are already being tested right now. And let me see. Yeah, so this is already executing, and what you'll see is that TestCafe is doing an excellent job thanks to a plugin that we provide with TestCafe to connect to Sauce Labs, and this makes it really easy for you to use TestCafe on these kind of testing infrastructures as well. And yeah, I think that with this, I really need to skip really quickly to my last slide there, because I had quite a bunch of more things to mention here, but we're going to be running out of time. Let me see what is the most convenient way of doing that. It was a really quick session, and yeah, if there are any questions, you can put them in the chat. You can reach me later on as well by email or by Twitter. You have my GitHub account where I hold the test scripts. The little test application is there as well in case you're interested. And yeah, if there are any questions, please raise them in the chat box. Let me see if there are any questions. Let me see if there are any questions that are nice. No, there are no questions here. Well, in this case, I would like to thank you for your attention, and check out TestCafe. It is free and open source, and yeah, see if it works for you.